We're proposing to take a light touch approach to the annual plan this year, and that's all part of what we want to discuss with you and to recommend that we don't go through a consultation process. And part of that is where, thinking about where we're at and a few things to consider. So usually this annual plan will be almost, 2 years after the LTP was agreed, but the last council decided to delay the LTP. So it was only agreed 8 months ago. So it's not that out of date. Potentially it was going to be very much out of date given the previous decision on water, but the LTP envisages that water will transfer on the 1st of July next year. If that hadn't been the case, then we'd have had to do some work around planning for water within there and adjusting that through the annual plan. I think as a new council, you've got your emerging strategic priorities and framework. And so part of our thinking in this recommendation to you is around concentrating your effort and our limited resources on the next LTP, which will be a big change LTP. It will be different from the others because of the transfer of water and because of the other reforms going on. And so thinking about the programme of work we've got ahead of us, looking at that as the big opportunity and how things lead into there. So delivering your decision on water is a big piece of work which will reshape the organisation. So we're now working on establishing a new CCO with those three councils. That's a big job in itself. Then there's the transferring of the assets and the services and the staff. Also a big process. We need to do that well and need to do that smoothly and look after the staff in that process so we can protect them but also protect service delivery. And then part of our thinking, I've mentioned this before, and it's one of the KPIs, is around a new organisational strategy which needs to feed into the LTP. So where are we headed, post-transformation, post-water transfer, what's next, how do we deal with stranded overheads and the other issues and challenges we have, including that rates capping environment. We're also going to be in the next few months dealing with a lot of legislation that impacts us as well. So, and the us is not just the staff; it's you. You need the time to deal with that. So all the water stuff you'll need time to deal with. There'll be agreements coming before you and plans coming before you. Simplifying local government. We've talked about that. Whilst the legislation for that is not planned until after the election, the discussions in both the regions, and bearing in mind we have two regions, we have to discuss this in both regions want to start discussions on that and what that looks like, and we need to not just be at the table. We think we need to have a leading role at the table if we're going to get a good outcome for Waitaki communities and avoid suboptimal results from limited thinking, should we say. We've got the RM reform coming in. So we're now talking to our neighbouring councils, again in two regions, about taking forward spatial planning. There will be work for you to do around that. What does that look like? And the challenge is it might look a bit different in each region. So there's a lot to think about in that space, as well as the other reforms around rates capping, the LG Local Government Systems Improvement Bill, and emergency management changes, which we haven't talked about much, which are going to put a lot more on councils. And there's a big talk in the local government sector about the cost of that, millions of dollars a year across the sector in additional costs. So there'll be work to do around that. And one of the things we need to bring to the strategy and advocacy committee is work around that strategy and policy work and how do we link that into the LTP. There is work to do there. So we know we've got Beach Road, we know we've got issues at Hampden. That's part of a wider challenge of coastal erosion. And what do we do around that? We need to do the strategy work on that because the Becker report outlines about $350 million worth of work that needs to be done if you were going to protect the whole coastline. So more than what we have to invest in water in the next 10 years. So that's clearly can't happen. So we need to do, we need your views and you need to feed into the strategy work on that. After water is transferred, parks and reserves will be our second biggest service after roading. We've got a lot of land holdings there. We are, just at the start of or early part of the parks and reserves review. There will need to be some, choices made in that. There'll be some options in there around what we can do, and that feeds into the LTP plan, LTP process as well. And the commercial strategy, which we've discussed in the workshop, we've got some more work to do around that. But you'll need to give time and attention to that, and so will we. The other thought we had on this is around the annual plan process. So it's set out in statute. It's a statutory process if you're going to go through that, including consultation and what you need to do. And one of the things we've discussed in the comms portfolio is about the restrictions of that. And actually, shouldn't we just decide our comms and engagement plan as a council? What are the things we need to engage our community on now and communicate with them on some big things over the course of the next 12 months leading into that LTP? If you put the effort into the annual plan process, then you're restricted in terms of what you can do, and we've got a short window to do it. So that's really my framing of it, probably a bit more than I thought I was going to say when we discussed this last week. But we're proposing a light touch approach. We think we can do a light touch approach to this. We think it's necessary, given everything else you and we have got on our plate, that actually the bigger game is preparing for the changes, the reforms, the water, and feeding it into the LTP process and focusing our efforts on that and making sure that we keep this light touch. Mandy.
Thank you for that. And I think one thing that, just to reiterate, that Alex may not have stated was you only need to engage on an LTP if there is significant or material change. So I'll talk to that a little bit more as we go through. Alison, if you could move to the first slide. So today I'm just going to do a really high level touch. I know we're wanting to look more at a strategic approach to the annual plan. But what I'm taking into consideration with the information that I'm presenting is we haven't done an annual plan for 2 years. The last one was actually an enhanced annual plan, and prior to that was the normal annual plan. So the enhanced annual plan was in the year that we deferred the long-term plan. So it's a slightly different requirements legally. And then we've had the long-term plan, and this year, 26-27, we'll have one annual plan, and then we'll go back to doing another long-term plan. So I thought it's worthwhile to take the opportunity just to remind you, like to step you through what we're proposing for our workshop scheduling and council meeting, and then to take you through, remind you what an annual plan is about, why you need to engage or why you don't need to engage, and then get some directions and decisions from you. Not decisions, but identify what directions and decisions we will need from you along the way. So just to let you know what we're looking at coming up. So today we've got this workshop here where I'll just let you know, as I said before, the direction and decision points, the roadmap, talk about engagement and what we need, whether you do need to or don't need to, and those triggers for that. We'll have a quick look at the fees and charges and budget and project overview. Next week, Amanda will lead that conversation around budgets and projects by group overview. And then on the 14th of April, it will be a draft annual plan overview and updates to any budgets and conversation there. On the council meeting, and I apologise, I've put the wrong date there, report to council re-engagement decision. I've put April, but there isn't a council meeting then. So we'll be looking at the 31st of March if we can get some clear direction today on whether on the position. As Alex said, our recommendation would be that we don't need to, but we'll talk about that a bit more. And then on the 23rd of June, that will be when we set the fees and charges, adopt the 26-27 annual plan, and set the 26-27 rates. No, we left that for you. Thanks, Alison. If we go to the next one, thank you. So just this is just boring into an annual plan and what that is. So as I said before, it's produced in the years in between an annual plan. So normally you'd have between a long-term plan. Normally you'd have a long-term plan, which we did last year. Then you'd have another 2, and then another 2 annual plans, and then a long-term plan. But because we were deferred our long-term plan by 1 year, we only have one annual plan in 26-27, and then we fall back into the same cycle as the other councils in New Zealand, which means another long-term plan will be produced in 27-37, which is what Alex was referring to before. And that long-term plan will be a significantly different long-term plan when we see Waters leave the business and what that does for council structure.
I guess just to jump in there for a second for new councillors, and I'm pretty sure you're both aware anyway, but the reason for the no long-term plan or pushing it out a year was because of all the change happening in water to make sure it could be encapsulated. But obviously for us that went a little bit skewered.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. That was exactly it. Councils around the country were given the option of deferring their LTP by 1 year on the basis of the water uncertainty. And we felt that that was a smart move to defer that by 1 year to have more certainty around the water situation. 13 councils around New Zealand took that deferral option. Unfortunately, it didn't really help any clarity by doing that. But it has now meant that we have only done our long-term plan last year, and we are in a position where we have haven't moved a lot from that. So the annual plan details council's activities, budget and financial needs for the year ahead, and it addresses any changes to the RTP. We have to talk about that in the annual plan when we produce it. As Alex said before, the annual plan was adopted June 2025 and was developed over a 2-year period because we did start that with the intention of producing a 24 to 34 long-term plan. It was only in the February of 2024 where they actually gave the option to defer that, and we felt at that time it was the right decision, and council felt at the right time it was the right decision for our community to defer that. So we were working on it, ready to produce it, and so we had a lot of work going into that. That our long-term plan states our delivery plan for 26-27 annual plan. And the annual plan is an update to what was indicated for delivery in year 2 of the LTP. The annual plan doesn't need to be consulted on unless the changes from year 1 our long-term plan, what it states in year 2, are significant or material. The annual plan is not audited, whereas the long-term plan is audited twice. The annual plan is not audited at all. And we need to adopt the annual plan legislatively by the 30th of June 2026. If we don't adopt by the 30th of June, then we can't set rates for 1 July. So that's the issue that creates. Legislation states what needs to be in the annual plan, and essentially that's the forecast financial statement, the financial statements for the previous year, the financial impact statements, rating-based information, and reserve funds. And that seems like a fairly flat amount that needs to be required in the annual plan. That is just what tells the financial story, and we build what other information around that to tell where we're at as a community, where we're at moving forward ahead into our 27 long-term plan. Next one, unless there's any questions on what I've put up there. No. So the directions and decisions that we'll need from you as we move along, and we'll need some direction on, the rate acceptability, and that will be more a conversation next week when Amanda speaks to you all. But are we comfortable with any variation to the 7% forecast in year 2 of the long-term plan? Have you got a hand up? No, sorry.
But is there anything we should know about when you mention it with the variation to the forecast of 7%? Are we looking around that track? Is there any indication where we're sitting right at the minute?
I think next week you'll have more idea.
Yeah, we'll talk about this in detail next week. It'll be a key area of focus along with the debt levels. But yeah, it is looking, our draft numbers are looking higher than the forecast 7% now.
And with regard to engagement, direction that I need from you. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, when we look at it, I think it'd be good to split out waters and non-waters, because a lot of our cost increases, over the past few years have been around waters, and we're obviously tied into, what we need to do to meet requirements there. So I think seeing it in that sense, and essentially what we did in the last long-term plan was we cut other things back to maintain the rate rise to a more affordable level, given what we had to do in the water space.
Sorry. With that water spend, we've obviously got a bit of rollover from projects that weren't completed this year. And is that probably balance between making sure we're doing what we need to deliver on our water services delivery plan, but also is what we've got ahead of us for the next 12 months going to be actually viable to do, or do we need more realism in there? And does the future water services plan allow for that? There's probably something that I'm not clear on because I know we're rolling projects over. So is what we've got in front of us in the next 12 months viable to actually carry out in the next 12 months?
Yeah, that's all something we'll get into detail next week, and it'll be at the department level.
Oh, sorry. As said before, as Alex mentioned, the question around engagement that I need direction on you from is, do we engage? If we engage, you've got to think about what would we be asking for feedback on? And if we seek feedback from our community, is it actually needed, or is it just confusing them at this stage? Is it unnecessary? If we do decide, either way we decide, we communicate why or why not we are engaging. We need to be really clear on that to the community so that we're not looking like we're avoiding anything. If we decide not to, it's just because it's unnecessary, that this is simply a reconfirmation of year 2 of the long-term plan, which we have put forward for them. So decisions that will need.
Can
from
I
you-
just make an observation on that engagement thing as to what seems to have happened traditionally in the past? So when we open out to inviting people to engage with us on our long-term plan or our annual plan, we have a queue of people with ideas of how we could spend more money on different things that are important to them. And we also have another queue of people who have got ideas about where we should be cutting back on things. And I think the danger is about raising expectations in what is a very constrained environment, particularly of those people who will want you to do more and consider their special project that's really important to them, and they'll have petitions and things like that. Is that realistically what we want to do, or do we want to have a clearer message that we're looking at no change or minimal change, really, given everything else that's going on?
And I think to that point, well, I'll put another slide on engagement, but to that point, in the past, we traditionally, with the annual plan, we traditionally get between 40 to 60 pieces of feedback from the community, which is great to receive. But probably of those 60, it's probably about 15 people requesting additional funding for different activities. But yeah, and the others are those that are giving feedback that we've asked for on what we've put out there. So it is great to hear from them. It's just as, the need for it when we are simply just reconfirmation of year 2. So the decisions that we'll need from you going forward is a decision on engagement for looking at a council report 31st of March. The next council meeting after that is the 12th of May, which is why we're proposing to put that to the 31st of March council meeting, which is why I'll need your direction on engagement. Fees and charges will be set at the 23rd of June council meeting. We'll also then adopt the 26-27 annual plan at the 23rd of June council meeting, and then we set the rates following the adoption of the annual plan. So it's quite a set order legislatively on the process of which you go by adopting the annual plan and then setting the rates. The fees and charges you can do at an earlier date. That doesn't need to be done. It's not prescribed to be necessarily on the same day, but for timing of this delivery, we're proposing to do it on the same meeting.
So I'm just being the devil's advocate. What happens if we don't adopt the annual plan on the 26th and 27th? Is the time frame between that date and the council meeting on the 23rd to actually do that?
If we don't adopt the annual plan on the 23rd of June, and sorry.
I guess without going through that formal consultation process, like what's the comms plan there, and like are we going to be providing information to make sure that people can easily understand it? Like, can we be using it as sort of like almost like a civics education alongside? I'm just thinking about opportunities to not be doing it in a formal way, but the framing is obviously going to be really important in there, but yeah.
What a number of councils have done in the past when they've opted not to engage is they've put out a press release as to why they haven't, and put that on the website at the same time to say why they haven't. Is that what you're meaning around that?
No, like I'm comfortable with that as an approach, but it's like, what are we doing, like after that to help people understand what's in it? And I understand that may bring up other questions and, and discussion, but like, I just think it's an important role that it probably maybe even a governance comms kind of discussion.
I was going to say that I think this is a discussion we need to have, and we need to work with ourselves and comms so that when this paper is coming to council, it's coming hand in hand with a bit of a comms plan around it. So we're really clear on how that could play out. Recognising, there is tight timeframes, but I think that's really important. And a lot of our direction needs to go towards the long-term plan to let people know that, with all the messiness up in the air, the decisions on what the future look like are going to be sort of sitting more in that space than in this space, which is a bit of a hole in the line. Franz.
Yeah, totally agree with what you just said, Matt. I think it's not only a case as in engage or not engage, but what does that engagement look like? As in, I would imagine, picking up what Alex has said, there's going to be this confusion about rates and water charges and those sort of things. And I think we need to communicate and be available to the public to explain that. Because I look at this slide here and I see a forecast of 7%, and I'm trying to work out in my own head now. Year 2 is next year, 2027, right? Which is when the CCO, when we have to transfer our assets, and that comes into effect into play. So all that needs to be explained. So I think it's not necessarily as in we're going out as in public, please give us your feedback on what you think about what should be in or out, but how do we engage to explain what is actually going on? That is my take on it.
Yeah, you did right, but just to be clear on the annual plan sort of timeframes, what we're working towards and it will start to happen in this annual plan, is the 1st of July 2027 is the changeover for the water, which sits just outside of this annual plan period we're talking about now. So it's part of it, and we need to be really clear on our messaging. I think that, but when it comes to where it should hit, it needs to be those discussions we have this time next year on our long-term plan.
I mean, I asked about, splitting out the water stuff from the rest, and I'd favour that we think about whether this is some sort of transitional year, so people know the decision has been made. Water doesn't transfer out for over another year yet, but we start separating it out. It's already separate on the bill, water, but I think in terms of our communications, talking about, council services and then water, separately, recognising it's going to go might be useful, because water is where the real cost drivers are.
There's a slide coming up more about engagement, and I guess the paper because council's going to have to decide whether it's fully engaging or not, and the paper that comes to council on the 31st of March will have different recommendations as to what level, because it's not as simple as engage or not engage. There's also, we could put the draft annual plan out for consultation, out to advise people in the draft form before we finalise it in June as well. So there's a whole lot of different engagements or informing that we can do on the website. But yeah, it's definitely going to be up on the website one way or another, and well informed about what's included. Just to emphasise as well, so waters is for the 28 financial year, so it's BAU, business as usual, for the 27 financial year. But we'll just keep making sure that we make that really clear to the community.
Thanks. So the next slide that we've got there, oh, sorry, Alison, next slide, thank you, Dale, is, as I mentioned before, there is no legislative requirement to change, to engage. You only need to consult or engage if there is significant or material change to the long-term plan. And I will have a look at the next sheet. We'll give a little bit of an overview of the projects and things too. When we talk about significant or material change, if it's already been approved by a long-term plan, then whilst it might be carried forward, it's been approved by the long-term plan. So we'll have a look at that a little bit. We consult or engage if there is something important to update the community on, or a change or matter that we want feedback on. I think, to Francis' point before, we've got another thing there that sort of says about the water. That's a story on its own. And certain items that, like you've raised, Franz, about keeping the community informed, they will have their own story, and they're not part of the annual plan story. They're part of our long-term plan story, or they may have pieces that surround it for that information as well.
And I think just probably to expand on that and around a comms plan, and I think a comms plan is going to be pretty vital in this conversation, because the water conversation and letting people know what is and isn't happening in the next sort of 12 months and then what the plan is. But also around the future for local government changes, a lot of people think that regional councils are gone already. There's a whole lot of misinformation out there, and we'll hopefully be starting to understand a bit more, but we need to show that we're actually in still a period of uncertainty, and around this kind of what does local government look like in the future. We need to start telling our community what's happening in that space and what's not currently happening, so that they don't jump ahead. Because I think as soon as people see a minister on TV saying, we're going to get rid of regional councils, they decide it's happened, and everything else that goes with it. So this is, I think my personal thought is, I think you're right around the no need to engage as such on our annual plan, because we don't have any decisions to be made. But I think there's a huge piece in there on how we talk to our community at the moment about why we're not engaging, and what's coming up that's going to need some discussions over the time.
You've said it all. I think it's all communication, this trip. I think we consulted everything the last 2-3 years. And all we did was keep a lot of good people out late at night and go around in circles. So I think as long as we tell people what's going on and give them the opportunity to speak to us if they want to, but I don't think we need to waste all that time out and about.
Thank you for that. So yeah, as I said as well, unnecessary engagement can lead to consultation fatigue, and we have had a lot of that over the last few years, and we'll have a lot more coming. We'll be starting the LTP pre-consultation in the coming few months, and there are other consultations coming out soon. I know that the Class 4 gambling will be in the next couple of months, potentially open spaces is in the next few months as well. So, we don't want to be unnecessarily looking for feedback when we don't have a matter. But again, absolutely agree. We need to communicate why we are or aren't, or what that direction is. So as I said as well, there's some big things happening. Obviously, we've got the Water Service Delivery Plan, the government reforms, and we just talked about all that before. And they will inform the 27 to 37 LTP story and the shape of how we deliver that. But some of those matters will have their own engagement as we go along that journey a bit more as well. And whether that engagement is just by comms, but we need to make sure that they are very clear to our community what those impacts of those are. I've suggested here we should inform the community on whether we are or aren't formally consulting or engagement. The reasons around that and the timing of delivering the annual plan is really important. We could ask, as Amanda mentioned, we could ask for feedback on the draft annual plan, which we could share that feedback at the proposed meeting to adopt on the 23rd of June. Question has to be again, what would this engagement achieve if we're asking for feedback on them? But then again, as to what Rebecca said earlier, potentially what we can do is break down the annual plan and give some guidance on how to read their way through it, what it means and what that variation to the long-term plan means, to really just clarify those points of why we have to produce an annual plan and what's changed or not changed or the significant or material. Alison, next slide, please. Thank you. So what I've done here is just looked at the big parts of year 2 of the 25 to 34 long-term plan and what's changed from that. So looking at the water rates and fees and charges, and the water, as I said, it's not the annual plan story, so let's not muddy the waters on that. That was quite a good pun. Did you like it? Thanks, Franz. So with regard to the rates, as said before, the 25-34 long-term plan forecast a 7% rate rise in year 2 of the long-term plan. And in the Water Service Delivery Plan, when we produced that for in-house delivery, we indicated rates would be around a 27% rates rise. So we're not going to go into that here. Amanda will look at that in next week's workshop for where we're looking. It won't be at the 27%, I don't believe, but we need to have those conversations next week, and we don't have the information right now. We also need to consider that there will be a rates cap of 2 to 4% that's going to be introduced through the transition period, and that will start from 1 January 2027. So we have to be mindful of that. And with that is the reporting rules around those rates caps as well. We have to start to meet those regulatory requirements there. We also need to consider the debt cap from financial year 2028 as well. So we need to keep that in our mind as we're considering our way through this. Fees and charges, looking at that, what I've done there, so the managers have reviewed their fees and charges for 26-27, and the majority of activity fees have increased in line with CPI. There are a few anomalies there. So I've broken those down into fees and charges by activity. So those that have been adjusted in line with CPI, the Aquatic Centre, Recreation, Parks, Gardens and Sports Field, cemetery fees, camping grounds and planning items, just 2 lines in there. Then there's been some changes by activity that are different to the CPI level. So airports increased by 10%, harbour slipway has increased 4 to 14, the building accreditation levy increased by 0.04, and that was a government requirement because I can see people cringing why we'd bother. The food, there's been new application increase fee by 50% and renewal for multi-site increased 50%. Roading increased 24% to 210% across most items, and that's to recover the costs, particularly administrative required now with some of those tasks we've done elsewhere. Trade waste increased 23 to 25% due to 27% rise in civil construction costs, and waters increased 3% to 27.5, the same. We've also got some new fees in there that we're introducing for the Forester Gallery for the new hire spaces. The Centennial Memorial Hall, we previously didn't have that available for booking, or didn't have it any visibility for booking that venue. So that's now been added. And the Network Waitaki Event Centre, new hire spaces for the new venue there. Airports, there's a new fee proposal for users of the airport parking and roading. There's some new fees there to recover officer time. There's been no fee charges to the civic activities and those other items listed there, which does include dog fees. Alison, we could move to the next one, thanks. Are there any questions on that before I move along? Sorry. No. So again, Amanda will go into this more next week, and we'll have Mark and Josh and Paul Hayes to join us next week as well. But at a very high level, looking at what's changed from year 2 forecast in 25 to 34 long-term plan, and reiterating that is what we're comparing it against, is year 1, year 2 of what we've forecast in that long-term plan, which we adopted just in June. So there's projects, we do have the $10 million of carryover projects from 25 to 26. So in year 2 of our long-term plan, we'd indicated 30,767. In 26, 27, we're looking at 52.7 million. And then plus an additional up to 10 million commitment, which we can't discuss those details right now. But what has changed, we've carried forward from 25, 26 projects worth 14.7 million, and they were approved in year 1 of the LTP. So they have already been agreed in that long-term plan delivery. We have new water projects to deliver to meet the DIA Tamata Arawai Water Service Delivery Plan requirements worth another 10 million. And then there's an additional 10 million for commitments, up to 10 million commitments. So reporting on project delivery will come to elected members in line with normal process, but the changes for the long-term plan carry forward into year 1, and the changes of what was being agreed for the Water Service Delivery Plan Tamata Arawai are also not part of consideration for significant or material change, because they've been approved and required by process. Yeah.
Did we not have a remit to say there was no carry forwards?
Well, this is a process that happens every single year. There's always going to be projects that span balance date. There's a lot of projects that are out in the market right now, requests for proposals and at the tender stage, and it's just they're pretty unsure whether they'll be done before 30 June. So it's best practice to put them into the budget for the next financial year, because they need to be done. Everything that we had in this current financial year, 24-25, we prioritised. We worked hard last year to make sure we had everything in the right year. There's a lot of water requirements that have strict deadlines, legislative compliance reasons, that they were prioritised in 24-25. So if they are still underway at 30 June 25, we must carry them on into 26 and get them done. So that represents the bulk of like this 11.38 of carry forwards and waters there. And then there's the standard projects that we had in year 2 of the long-term plan for waters, the 15.97, and they were prioritised as well. We tried to defer as much as we could over that 10 years of the long-term plan to make every single year achievable, and conscious of rate levels and debt levels all the way through. Yeah, and then the extra 10 million odd of water services delivery plan. We want to make sure when we deliver this water services delivery plan, it's already been reviewed and we've had some feedback on it. We want to make sure that the water services delivery plan matches exactly what we have in our budget. So we need to make sure that happens. So one way or another, we have to get this work done. And if we haven't got it done by 30 June this year, it's going to have to go into that next financial year. We're also taking a good look at what we had in that 27 financial year to see if there's anything that can be bumped back into later years. So we're doing what we can, but we're really driven by the government's rules around what's required by certain dates. And a lot of it is in that water space. So that doesn't leave much capacity for the rest of it. And just to note, so we are looking at around 52, 53 mil. which is really significant based on previous years. We had set it around 30 for the last few years as being achievable financially and in terms of resourcing and our contractors' availability. And this year it was double that, but we had separate projects like the event centre and Forrester, which were quite separate from our day-to-day workload. So yeah, the 52 is pretty high. It's something we're going to have to look at. Also to note, when it mentions the up to 10 million commitment, that's for things that are kind of being looked at the moment that need to come back to council for a bit more conversation around. The most important one is the grandstand, which council has approved to go ahead with phase 2 of the Network Waitaki Event Centre. So that's the grandstand is included in that 10 million there. We need to show the cost on our books because it's going to be our asset, but that is all externally funded as well. So there's no loan funding, there's no rate funding. We're getting grants for that. So it doesn't. These numbers look really high, but it doesn't always mean that it affects our rates or our debt level.
Can I just come back to your original question, John? So the original thing with carryover, was what we agreed with the last council. So what used to happen was the council would go through the annual plan process, and then at the end of the financial year, managers would go through, and there would be a separate report that came forward on carryovers, and we were just getting in a mess essentially because we'd agreed a budget and then we lumped a whole load of other stuff on top of that, which just made it, the capital program was growing and growing, was totally undeliverable, frankly. And so we changed the process to say, no, we need better information from managers around the capital program as to what's not going to be spent before the end of the year, and we build it into this process. And I think in terms of the numbers you see there, this is the starting point, not the end point. We've got some work to do because if you look at that in terms of just water alone, it's more than we've ever delivered in that water space. And I know, some of what's in there in terms of carry forwards, the process has started and for procuring that, so it's going to spill over into the next financial year. But going back to what I said earlier, this is going to be a service that's in transition. We're going to need to be engaging those staff in that transfer process. So how the asset's going to transfer, what is their role? So it's going to be a service disrupted. So we've got some real challenges in this area between what we're required to deliver, including legal requirements, and what our capacity is to deliver. And we can't, we've found before you can't magic up capacity, even if you do a lot of this externally. You need your own staff supervising, so even if you bring in more external project managers, you need your staff who are setting the requirements and supervising the delivery of those projects by those project managers so they meet requirements. So it is a big challenge we've got in this space at the moment because that figure isn't realistic. We pared it back as far as we could to what we thought, 15, 16 million is realistically what we thought was deliverable per year within that water space.
So thank you for that, and that's what I wasn't hoping to hear, but I thought I was going to hear it anyway. So, does that mean we reduce this coming annual plan by 18 mil, given that 6 million is for the grandstand? So you take that off your 22, leaves us 18 mil overspend for the upcoming annual plan.
It's something we can look at a bit more next week. I'll chunk it down into different departments and things like that. We won't be going through line by line project level again, but we're all familiar with what's in the water services delivery plan. So that's our starting point. We have to do that. We can't really change the years too much. Yes, roading program, that's pretty much our standard roading program. We had a big conversation last year about maintaining or even reducing levels of service and roading in some areas. So that's another strategic conversation to have next week. And then there is some stuff in the other space that we can consider our priorities around those, but it's pretty minor in the scheme of things. Water is our big one and we're driven by legislation.
I think the grandstand one is that one of the interesting little challenges that just comes up. So the opportunity is there now because external funders are there to provide that, but it'll be on our land and our assets. And so we can't just go, hey, this has nothing to do with us. Yeah. We have to be involved, and it looks like it's going to come through our books in terms of expenditure. That we'll be the contracting party for the construction of that, and that means then that will take up resource of your project management office that otherwise could have been focused on, accelerating delivery of water, because we will need a project manager who is working on that. It won't take up all their time, but it will take up a chunk of their time. So that's a bit of capacity gone that we didn't anticipate in a year when we really need to get those water things done and over the line.
Sorry.
Just a bit of clarity. So when we do these big capital projects and lots of the event centre, why don't we just lend them the money and put a CCO or something in charge of it, and then it becomes up to them to make the dots? Because what I'm getting at is it starts interfering with our annual plan and long-term plan, those numbers coming through our books.
Setting up a CCO is not an easy process, so that's a big financial commitment. So you saw the figures for the water CCO. That's about $30 million, they reckon, to set up the water CCO, and then that takes time and commitment to do that. And even then, if it's council money going into it, we've got to be involved in it. We can't just go have a bag of money and let us know how you get on. You are accountable to the community for the expenditure of that money, and so you need your staff on there and reporting to you and being accountable to you on how that's going. So even if you deliver it through a CCO, yes, if it's council money that's going in there, you're still going to need to have staff involved in it. You're going to need to be involved in it, and on the governance side.
I totally get that because it's public money, but there must be some way of an arm's length where it makes this whole process easier, because, I know it costs money to set it all up and I know it does everything else, but it does affect the outcome of our annual plan and our long-term plan, because it's got to go through our book. So there's a way of, I'm not saying bypass it, but there's a way of actually getting it through that could be a lot easier than it is.
I think it's a discussion that we could have had back in the start of the event centre. When we're looking at probably the tail end of that project, does it make sense to change the way we do things again when, it's probably a challenging enough project, to be fair? Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I do wonder if we've got the capacity to go, how else could we carry this out?
Yeah, and we did question that. So there was a discussion at the start of the event centre and again on this phase 2 as to whether we should be the contracting party on this. So if we weren't for phase 2, it could just show us a $500,000 contribution in there if we weren't the contracting party. But frankly, it's really difficult as to, well, who is then the contracting party? Because the trust has no money behind it, so then are you relying on some other individual? And then you've got all the complication of it will be our asset and part of our building. Are you happy to just go, yeah, we're not going to be involved in this, and just let us know how you get on and show us what you've delivered at the end of it? Yeah. Whatever problems might come with that you haven't been involved in, trying to.
No, I get that. I was thinking.
Thanks. No, that's all right. So Alison, if you could go to the next slide, please. So yeah, I've just put a very basic roadmap up here. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the briefings on the 10th, the 17th and the 14th of April. Meanwhile, we've been working on a draft annual plan, and we'll continue to work on that, refining it through till June adoption date. There'll be a council report going to the 31st of March council meeting regarding the engagement, and then I've said there needs to be communication following that decision at that council meeting regarding what that engagement structure looks like and what we'll be doing with that. Then after those briefings, we'll be finalising the draft annual plan from April through to June, and then look to adopt the annual plan, confirm the fees and charges, adopt the annual plan and set the rates at the 23rd of June council meeting. So moving right along, this is our last slide. Sorry, as said previously, we've got today's workshop. Next week we have the budgets and projects high level workshop. Then the week after, 14th of April, we've got the draft annual plan overview and an update on the budget to you all then. Then we'll be bringing at council the report to the 31st of March for recommendation on the annual plan community engagement. And then at the 23rd of June, we'll be setting the 26-27 fees and charges, adopting the 26-27 annual plan and setting the 26-27 rates. So what I need from you, and I think we've had some good conversation around, is a direction on that report. as we've discussed, our recommendation from officers' perspective would be not to engage, but supported by the right amount of communication to clarify why we aren't and the timing of the annual plan. And then looking at, as Rebecca asked, how can we give some clear guidance on how to read that annual plan? So that might be something we do for our website and bring that back to you at the 31st of March. But if I can get some clear confirmation on that, that'd be great.
I guess, I'll put it out to the team to see. I'm quite comfortable with that approach, but certainly I think that a bit of time that's probably not really earmarked in there is around a comm strategy. And so, is it something that Rebecca and I work on and then circulate around so that we work on getting a comm strategy to the 31st of March meeting, alongside the actual recommendation on community engagement and things. Just trying to work out when we make sure we fit that in so it doesn't become an afterthought.
So I've already had an exchange with Helen, and she will be, she's committed to getting something in draft form to us next week, so I can bring that through the comms portfolio so that you've got something to edit rather than work on.
Might back on. Everyone else relatively comfortable with that as an overview, including the comms in there? Hannah, were you wanting to talk on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Alex's comment. It'll be good to have something to start with, and I think the approach is more of like an inform and clarity piece. So I think it's if we give direction around the approach, like in the principles of what we want, and then pass it over to Alex and the team to kind of shape up for us to be able to feed back into.
Absolutely. Is everyone else relatively happy and the team's clear enough? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much for all the work done in the background.